Hello and welcome today to Maidan Square. Today we're going to talk about Russian disinformation and the reality surrounding the famous Maidan Square revolution. And for that, we're here in the private residence of Yanukovych, the president at the time, who was elected in 2010 to set up an association agreement with the European Union. Approved by the people in parliament, but when it was time to sign, everything changed. He ended up supporting Russia. We'll review common elements of disinformation frequently seen in the media. But before we start, a quick word from our partner, thanks to whom you'll also be able to debunk all the fake news around you, and that's Ground News. Ground News is a news aggregator that searches all global sources, and each time it gives you the reliability level of the sources. Also their bias, letting you know if it's more right-wing, left-wing manipulated or not. For example, if I look at the newspaper Le Parisien, it's more right-leaning, but it's a very high-quality source, whereas Le Monde is more left-leaning. The information there is also reliable, so I can check the trustworthiness of each piece. What are the political leanings of the media that will broadcast it? And that way I have a personalized news feed where I can apply filters. For example, by only looking at information about military topics, or by focusing, for instance, only on the war in Ukraine or the tensions between the Koreas. For example, if I'm interested in this information, like the claim that India shot down 6 Pakistani fighter jets during the war in May, we see that the information is picked up by 45 media outlets, but 46% of them are rather classified as right-leaning. However, 67% of these sources are considered reliable or very reliable. We can see how right-wing, left-wing, and centrist media handle the same information differently. And the reliability of each source is defined by 3 independent organizations whose reliability has really been verified. Not to mention that we no longer need to pay for online subscriptions to lots of different magazines. Everything is really centralized and accessible. So you too, treat yourself to quality information by following my exclusive link to groundnews.com. You'll get an exclusive 40% discount on the subscription. You'll be able to verify information, avoid bias, and know everything that's happening in the world without any restrictions. The link is in the comments of this video, and now let's continue talking about misinformation. Ground News really helped me for this video. To understand Maidan, you must first understand the Ukrainian people and their aspirations. Since the end of the USSR, that is in 1991, when they voted overwhelmingly for the end of the USSR, to break away from Russia, to have a free and independent Ukraine. All of the oblasts, with more than 90% voted in favor of this independence, and the Donbass with more than 80%. Even Crimea, even Sevastopol voted in favor of this independence. Everyone recognized this referendum vote as legitimate, even Moscow at the time. But unfortunately, Russia continued to try to keep control over the country. This led to the Orange Revolution, and the president at the time was poisoned with dioxin, but he survived. But public opinion, which was overwhelmingly attached to Ukraine, including in Crimea, remained strong despite the few efforts made by Russia to try to regain control. For example, the Republican Party of Crimea, in 1992, its program was either the independence of Crimea or joining Russia. It was active in the 1990s, but it quickly lost influence, and by 2012, it didn't even have a single elected representative left. Then there's Rusko and Zinspo, a small local party. It got, hold on, for Crimea joining Russia in the 2010 regional elections. 4% of the votes. There were 4% of the people in Crimea who wanted to be Russian. So yes, there are also polls, like the 2013 Gallup poll, which shows that 23% of the people in Crimea might support joining Russia. That means this opinion actually lost 10 points among the people of Crimea in just 2 years. 23% is very far from the fake plebiscite, obviously, the rigged fake elections that the Russians held afterwards. But what I simply want you to understand is that overall there is a strong sense of Ukrainian identity that is overwhelmingly shared. Whether you are in Crimea, whether you are in the Donbass, or anywhere in Ukraine, except that overall we have an economy that is still not great, and there is a lot of corruption. And Russia is considered to be the country they need to move away from in order to try to improve the situation. Ukrainians have their own models. Is it better to follow the model of Poland or Belarus? Is it better to follow Georgia or Armenia? Unfortunately, Georgia had already been invaded in 2008. But overall, they know that the farther you are from Russia, the higher the life expectancy, better democracy, and greater wealth. Everything gets better closer to Europe. So there is a deep pro-European aspiration that is deeply rooted among Ukrainians, and that is expressed election after election. And Yanukovych, in 2010, was elected on a plan for an association agreement between Ukraine and the European Union. It was in his electoral platform. He won with this program. It was his program.
He continues our process of European integration.
During the first 3 years of his term, there were discussions, there were exchanges, there were negotiations. And this association agreement with Europe was approved by the Rada, by the Ukrainian parliament, by an overwhelming majority. In 2013, the moment arrives for him to enact the law. Then what happens? Yanukovych completely changes his mind, he switches sides, he completely flips sides, to say the least. And all of a sudden, the European Union, the association agreement, he's no longer interested in it, he turns to Moscow, he changes his mind. And so, of course, the people are not going to agree. You have about 100 students who are going to say this is not possible. And to deal with this small group of students, an incredible amount of violence breaks out, they are arrested. And then there are exceptional laws, what we call dictatorial laws, which suddenly push Ukraine into authoritarianism, and it is no longer a democratic country. Meetings are forbidden, and more than 5 vehicles traveling together is prohibited. It's forbidden to set up tents here, or even just to play music. Even though it was right here, on Maidan Square, that historically all the peaceful demonstrations always took place. The revolution on granite in 1990 with the students' hunger strike and so on. 2004, the Orange Revolution. Once again, with the goal of getting rid of corruption, getting rid of Russian influence, to be able to move closer to models that are a bit more inspiring. And when someone tries to steal their democracy, of course, they wake up. Obviously, students come here, and these dictatorial laws will wake up the entire population. And it's no longer just a simple question. It's not just about fighting for this association agreement. It's really about putting an end to a system for good, against corruption, against Russian influence, against this dictatorial way of governing. And these hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians, for weeks and months, they will stay here in the cold, in the snow. So this peaceful movement, which simply wants the people's choice that was voted for to be implemented, since the end of November 2013 has been facing more and more pressure, more and more aggression from the government. There are real urban battles starting to take place here, with a culmination of violence from February 18 to 2014. Since they've already been fighting for almost 5 months, and there are snipers positioned all around there. The Ukraine Hotel. It was mostly controlled by the protesters themselves. But there are about 100 direct victims, civilians, unarmed, pacifists. Of those people who are going to be shot, doctors, professors, students. But you see all these names and all these people, about 100 who were killed, and they're the heavenly 100. It's a kind of phrase in Ukrainian. But so the violence, it started here, the climax was here, and there was violence. The next day, Yanukovych left. He fled abroad, and where did he go? To Moscow, obviously. He wasn't going to seek asylum in the United States or in Europe. He went to Moscow to his master, Vladimir Putin. He leaves power without any transition. And so legally, according to the Ukrainian constitution, the Rada declares the office vacant. There is no longer a president. There is no one left to embody the office. And so he is removed from power. With the appointment of a temporary president, while waiting for free democratic elections to be held, which will take place immediately after. There is no illegal revolution. There is complete respect for the Ukrainian constitution. With a majority of the Ukrainian parliament members voting on the decision concerning President Yanukovych, including, by the way, a majority of the members of his own party. And we discover these are palaces that he had granted himself while prime minister and built behind him. Here, he hadn't even bought it. He had it given to him by the Ukrainian state, and so it went back into the Ukrainian treasury. He was, and he is, the symbol of corruption. Basically, of everything you can imagine here, of everything that's bad, and of everything Ukrainians want to get rid of. And when you look around here, there's a helipad, there are absolutely sumptuous gardens, and there are incredible views over the Dnieper. If you walk all the way around the park, it's more than 8 kilometers of walking you can do here. If you come to Ukraine, I recommend coming here because it's really beautiful. And that's where I come to the question of propaganda and disinformation, especially spread by Russia, which tried to make people believe that the Maidan events were a manipulation by the CIA and the evil West. Whereas in reality, it was the failure of an anti-democratic revolution that was orchestrated by Russia, by Moscow, to dismantle the democracy that was starting to take hold here in Ukraine. There is absolutely no credible document from any country, no serious news article that will tell you the CIA was behind these events. So pro-Russian supporters will also talk to you about Victoria Nuland's speech. In 2013, she was Assistant Secretary of State for Europe and Eurasia, particularly in charge of Ukraine. Some leaked phone calls show her discussing a future government, but here she's simply sharing her vision, not imposing anything. This was not an official United States position, just an American official giving her opinion. Afterwards, she made very disrespectful comments about the European Union and its role in handling the crisis. That's another issue, and there's more. When she speaks here, it's the speech in which she explains that billions of dollars have supposedly been invested for Ukraine. Except that in reality, here too, it's a 2013 speech that was manipulated by Russian propaganda, in which, simply, she reminds us that since Ukraine's independence in 1991, the United States has supported Ukrainians in developing democratic institutions, promoting civil society, and everything related to good governance. In other words, all the conditions necessary for Ukraine to be an exemplary democratic state. So they actually invested $5 billion to fight corruption and to organize fair elections. And I would like to remind you that Europe is doing exactly the same thing. For example, I remember when I was in Chad with the army, there were official programs to help the Chadian government better manage secure identity documents for its population. We can also look at the proper management of infrastructure. So that's something where there are associations that receive subsidies, operating support, and especially to have international observers. That also has value. And by the way, the United States also invested $20 billion in Russia, so that's $5 billion in Ukraine and $20 billion in Russia, to help it adopt good international practices so that Russia could also join the WTO, the World Trade Organization. All of these are efforts the United States made, not to overthrow the Ukrainian government. And yes, the United States, they invest so that Ukrainians and Russians in the future can be reliable economic partners in a peaceful world. That was a very clear and stated objective on their part. Today, we see that in the end, Ukraine has moved even more quickly toward Europe and the United States because it is being attacked by Russia. But Russia, however, has actually regressed. So, among the other elements of Russian propaganda, there is the overexposure of a few far-right groups that were indeed present in Maidan Square during those events. But they are extremely marginal. They represent absolutely nothing. And by the way, in the following elections, get this, the far-right only received 2% of the votes in Ukraine. So, making people believe that this movement was infiltrated by the far right was completely false. And by the way, the movement brings together hundreds of millions of people from all walks of life. We have people coming from Donetsk, Kharkiv, regions that are 100% Russian-speaking. You see, so the reality is actually quite simple, with far fewer nuances than what the media tries to make us believe. They're in Putin's pocket. And all these channels of influence, Ukraine managed to overthrow a corrupt pro-Russian dictator. They managed to get rid of that influence. They started to fight corruption. That's why Ukraine ranks better than Russia in all international rankings in terms of corruption. And this effort, it's still not a done deal, but this effort has accelerated even more, obviously, with the war that started in 2022. But Russia is trying to exploit every little weakness and everything in this information war. We must not give up a single inch. As soon as you have someone in the media saying nonsense and telling you that the CIA was involved, that there were Nazis around me, here, do you know how to respond to them? There are actually sources. Systematically, there you go, there's the Hotel Ukraine here, Maidan Square. That's the beginning of everything we've seen since the Russian invasion of Crimea, as if there were Russian speakers being persecuted in Crimea. Of course, that never happened. Let's honor everyone who fought for this country's freedom and remember those still fighting and dying each day. Hundreds of thousands of friends are in the trenches, defending their country and us, while we wait until we too are ready to be a strong enough power so that Russia does not try to attack us. I refer you to this video where I discuss the Russian threat, in which they state very clearly that they will try to take back the Baltic countries, and therefore the European Union, and therefore NATO. So let's support them. I'm also putting the links in the comments of this video so you can take part in the fundraising for humanitarian aid and to support the French-speaking fighters who are fighting here, and there are now more than 100 of them. I'll see you soon, together against disinformation.